Number one, push off, will you? There's a good fellow. I'm trying to take a relaxing bath.
May I respectfully remind you that you have now been in that bath for over 3 years?
Hi there, and welcome to Baseball by Design. I am SportsLogos.net minor league baseball correspondent Paul Caputo, broadcasting live, as always, from the Sunday Helmet Hall of Fame in my basement in Fort Collins, Colorado. This morning, what a special episode this is. This is the third anniversary of Baseball by Design. I am so very pleased to have on the podcast Chris Creamer, who basically gave me my start in this industry. Chris was the very first guest on the very first episode of Baseball by Design. Chris, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Paul. Thanks for having me back again. I'm never here on a mundane show. It's always some sort of fancy anniversary or
Right.
milestone, which is fine. I'm okay with that. But next time I'm going to come with like party whistles or favors or something, some sort of way to celebrate a little more. I was going to say from your intro, we need to come up with a better title for you. You're more than a mere minor league baseball correspondent. You are like minor league baseball czar or king or emperor.
Well, that'll be interesting. I'm gonna have to get some new business cards made up, I guess, here if I'm gonna be a czar of something. This podcast obviously has is a direct result of the articles I've been writing for sportslogos.net. Sportslogos.net is the go-to place for people who are interested not just in minor league baseball logos, but sports logos of all types. Minor league baseball, obviously a very small part of what you cover on that website. Every time I go onto the site to write a new article about some update or, a new brand or something like that, there's always been like 20 articles written since I was last on there. So you guys are, you got a team of people doing great work on there. I want to just jump right in. We've been doing this podcast for 3 years now. What do you think? Like, do you have a sense for like, is there enough of any kind of trend the last 3 years that you see something different now than you saw, like, say, 3 years ago when I started doing the podcast?
That's a good question. In 3 years, it seems that we're going in two different directions at the same time in terms of branding. There's either the really crazy, let's throw everything but the kitchen sink at something and see what sticks, like we get from City Connect or from the NBA City Edition or some of these alternate identities in minor league baseball. And then we also get like the ultra traditional or the very stripped down or names like that we saw in the PWHL or the WNBA in recent days, where names are just like verbs with no S at the end and a different idea of what a team could be referred to as. It's kind of an interesting time in logos and branding and all that right now in sports. I'm not sure where it's going to go, but it's neat to see that there are so many different directions going at the same time. I'm excited to see where this all ends up soon.
One of the stories that you covered that I think is really interesting, not at all related to minor league baseball, unless you consider there have been minor league baseball teams that have had like a false start, right? Like where they unveil a brand and they're like, no, 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 just kidding. Like the reaction was so negative that they're just like, no, we're not actually really doing that. The Nashville Sounds had like an orange logo that everyone hated and they walked it back and they took, essentially the same brand and made it red instead of orange. The New Hampshire primaries, the Fisher Cats originally were going to be the New Hampshire primaries, as you know. We're seeing something similar right now in a recent story with the Boss Nation, which was the women's soccer team,
Hmm.
with brands, especially in minor league baseball, becoming sort of more outrageous. And like there's these big, sweeping, huge, funny changes that we see, and there's always a negative reaction. I'm curious whether you have an opinion on what kind of negative reaction has to happen for a team to actually like walk it back, and what kind of negative reaction has to happen where the team's just like, yeah, this is par for the course. We'll see, we'll be fine.
It There seems to be some sort of a level of people actually offended before someone will walk it back. And with the Boston women's soccer team, people seem to be more offended by the unveiling video, the announcement video, where they kind of, tongue in cheek. I'm not going to get too much into it, but if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. That seemed to be what rubbed people the wrong way the most. Uh, Teams like Nashville. Did they really need to walk that back? I don't think so. That was more people scared of a big change to an identity of something they're familiar with. Um, you know, uh, Same idea. The PWHL, the Women's Hockey League last year, all those names leaked, those trademarked names. We kind of had a hand in that too. And the reaction was so negative that it had people considering, pulling their support of the league. I'm not going to support this league if these names are attached to it.
Yeah.
And the league did a complete 180 and dropped all those names, came out with six brand new names, which, were met with a little more positive review. So what needs to happen? There needs to be a level of offense to it, or there just needs to be a universal hate for it. You can get away with like it's more like analyzing what is the hate. Is it actual people not liking it because it's a terrible name or terrible brand, or people who are just afraid of a sudden change? And sometimes you can push through it. Sometimes it works. Most of the time it doesn't, and you just revert back in a couple of years. The Chicago Fire in soccer, they tried to push through with frankly, a terrible rebranding
Yeah.
about 2 or 3 years ago. And eventually they came to their senses and they're like, look, this is not up to snuff. This is not a professional level logo. Let's go back and change things. And fortunately they did. But there's no one right answer to that. But
I
it's case by case, I think, is my long answer to that simple question.
Well, the reason I bring that up is because, we were talking before we got started here. You were looking at some of the recent things that I've posted here for
Yeah.
on sportslogos.net. I tend not to editorialize in the articles that I write. I tend to be pretty straightforward with, here are the changes. Here's who designed it.
What is that, Dragnet? Just the facts, ma'am?
Just the facts, exactly.
Just the
Just the
facts.
facts, ma'am. And I save my editorializing maybe for social media or for this podcast. The other thing that I try to do is I try to be pretty patient with rebrands, right? Like I try to
Mhm.
say like, hey, look, there's always a negative reaction. And if it's a well-designed brand, people are going to come around and it's going to be okay. One of the ones that I just can't get my head around right now, and I covered it for sportslogos.net, and I did not editorialize on your website,
You're a
but
pro.
but the loss of the Carolina Mudcats in favor of the Wilson Warbirds is devastating to me. Like a classic minor league brand that deserved to be retained in the same way I think, the Toledo Mud Hens, the Durham
Mhm.
Bulls. I mean, a classic brand that did not deserve the fate that it received of being rebranded with a logo. And again, one of the things graphic designers love doing is criticizing other graphic designers. It's our favorite hobby. A logo, the Wilson Warbats logo is objectively bad. The typography is just it was clearly done by an illustrator who knew nothing about typography. It looks like it would be impossible to embroider. I hate being like so like just sort of pervasive with that level of criticism of it. But the classic Carolina Mudcats brand
Mhm.
being replaced by an objectively bad Wilson Warbirds brand was like personally, it was like it felt like a personal affront to me. Have you had that before? Have you had, rebrands that you've seen where you're just like, oh, I know this is not going to go over well, like as soon as you see it?
All the time. And it's hard to because what happens a lot is a team will be like, "Hey, Chris, we're going to give you early access and tell us
Uh-huh.
what you think." Right?
Yeah.
They're so nice to you.
Yeah.
And then you're like, "Okay, let's see it," and you see it, and you're just like, "Oh, that's going to be
Yeah.
hated."
Yeah.
And you don't want to say that, right?
Right.
Because you're face to face either with the guy who designed it or the guy that
Right.
helped create it, and they're so excited about this brand coming out
Right.
in 2 days, and nothing you say is gonna. It's too late to change anything, so why
Right.
should I?
Right.
So you try to find the positives. You point
Yeah.
out, okay, I like that you guys went in a bold new direction here. You try to sugarcoat it. You went outside the
Yeah.
box a little, and then maybe you'll be like, some people aren't going to get it.
Yeah.
Just try to push through it, and people will have it. But it is hard in those instances. It happens quite often. One quick story, and apologies if I shared this story in the past, but I feel it's relevant to this question. I had the opportunity to sit down face to face with the president of a a professional sports team. And this president happened to be a former player that I grew up watching and idolizing, and we had a great interview. And just as I was about to leave, he said, "Hey, do you want a sneak peek of our special uniforms that we're coming out with later this year?" And of course, I want,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely, I want to. And laid it out for me. And there was a part of the uniform that I just didn't like. It was just like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm being very vague here because I don't want
Of
to
course. Yes.
give anything away. So my natural reaction, because I've developed a good relationship with this person. I
Yeah.
feel like we're kind of friendly, face-to-face talk for an hour.
Yeah.
And you feel comfortable. You let down your guard. And my face, and my face was like, oh, you guys went. And I looked up, and there's this face staring at me. This guy I grew
No.
up watching, and he's just like, giving me the eye, the eyebrow. Like,
Oh
what are you
no.
about to say? Oh, you went. That's an interesting choice. Not a lot of people have done
No.
this. It's okay. Let's see how
Yeah.
it goes.
Yeah.
But you got to be careful with that. And
Yeah.
going back to you mentioned the Mudcats, and I don't want
Yeah.
to skip over that. Here's an example of a team that might roll back,
Mm.
right? Like, there's been no positive reaction to this
Yeah.
identity change. There's no reason for the identity change, right? They still play in
Yeah.
Carolina, am
Right.
I right?
Right. Yeah.
So what are we doing? This is
No.
change for the sake of change, I guess, trying to reestablish yourself. They're in a new city.
Yeah. They're moving like 20 miles away from Zebulon to Wilson.
You made up both those names. I know it.
Zebulon
They
named for
moved to
the
Mars.
explorer Zebulon Pike, which
Okay.
also is the namesake for Pikes Peak here in Colorado.
Look at this. I always learn something when I
This is
talk
what we're doing here on the podcast, Chris.
So, but this is an like, okay, what are they going to do? Either they're going to roll back in a couple of years.
Yeah.
It's probably too late to roll back now. Or, they'll try to milk it as a, oh, this is our alternate identity. This is our
Right.
throwback night. We're going to wear this every Sunday home game or whatever. We're going to be the Mudcats again. I feel the Mudcats will be back. Just a hunch. We're going to see them on the field again. They'll either be an alternate identity, a throwback, or the team will be in motion bringing it back. It's just too powerful of a minor league brand and too beloved. And who's going to buy that Wilson stuff, right? Like, you're not getting any takers on that.
Right.
It's not going to be a nationally appreciated logo where somebody from Colorado like yourself is not going to go buy a Wilson Warbirds cap.
Right.
You might get the Sunday helmet, but you won't get the cap.
If there's a Sunday helmet, I would probably add it to the collection, but there's no investment in that, right? Like I mean, the interesting thing about that is like when I first saw that logo, I thought, oh, please don't let this be anyone I know who designed it. Like, because I mean, I'm not a logo designer, and I understand the wizardry that it takes to create a good logo. Like, it's not easy. And you, of course, have been covering logos and branding forever, so it's not an easy thing. But that just means when it's done poorly, man, it's easy to, the people who are expert at it, have a baseline level of technical expertise that they have to bring to something. And then it's like that real sort of magic special sauce. So I was very relieved that it was not someone who I knew who had created it, but it accentuated the importance in, very much the work that you're doing in covering branding and logos and news, like, and trying to be timely in covering that news. The relationships are a huge part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel lucky that I've established some relationships with a handful of designers in minor league baseball, some of whom will give me advance access to stuff because they trust me, they trust us with it, and they know that we will observe embargoes when it's out there. But you mentioned there have been leaks before. How do you manage having a relationship with these leagues, a relationship with these teams, and then choosing whether to cover and publicize a leak when it's out there?
It's one of the hardest parts of the job. And I just went through this the other day with the WNBA Toronto team. So I can share that story. The WNBA Toronto team news leaked that they were going to be called the Tempo. I keep wanting to say the Turbo, but they're the Tempo. So some of the writers that work with me, gave me a heads up. Hey, heads up, this is out there in case you missed it, which I had. I had missed it.
Yeah.
And so I went to check it out, and within 15 seconds, I had found the logo.
Yeah.
Just it wasn't out there yet, but I had it.
Yeah.
And okay, what do we do? Do we post this? Are we the
Mhm,
ones that
mhm.
are going to leak this? Are we going to be the guys? And if we don't, somebody else is.
Yeah,
Because if I found it in 10 seconds, somebody else is going to find it maybe in 30, 40 seconds. But while we're
yeah,
discussing it, it's going to go out there.
yeah.
So, I had a little chat with one of the writers I work with, and what do you think we should do? Is this going to hurt our relationship with the WNBA? This is a brand new team in Toronto where I'm based out of. Do we really want to start things this way? Um, and it took a while, but we decided, okay, let's just do it and hope for the best. And fortunately, nothing really came of it.
Yeah.
Probably because it wasn't like the logo wasn't given to us in confidence. It wasn't given to us with, hey, don't you dare post this. This was something that, to be fair, I was able to find publicly.
Hmm.
And
Right.
fortunately, it was their fault that it was there.
Right.
So the same way that the name leaked, the logo leaked the same way I found it, no one else did. And that's tough. It's such a hard decision. I hate making the decision now and then, especially though, like I really have no relationship with the WNBA or the Tempo, but some of these leagues and teams I do have relationships with, or we're about to be given access to something and then
Hmm.
something leaks. And that's where it gets to be the hardest. So
Yeah.
my policy in those situations seem to be if it's out there and already everyone has already seen it, I will discuss that it has been put out there.
Hmm.
If I am given a leak and say, "Oh, heads up, I found this somewhere," and I know that I'm about to get exclusive access to it through the team, I might just say, "Okay, I'm going to hold off on this. This is not worth damaging relationships or future access to things." And is that am I being a true journalist if I'm doing that? I don't know. But to be honest, I find it much more important to be able to get the actual story out of these teams,
Hmm.
to be able to talk with the designers on the record with the team, so I can get these actual stories out into the public and ask the questions that my readers want to know, which, to be honest, they're not going to get anywhere else, right?
Right.
Like, Fox Sports isn't going to ask questions about, why stitching is done this or why is there chain stitching, why the embroidery is done this.
Right.
Um, but I will. So, but if I go out and post these leaks, what does it get me? It gets me one day of decent traffic, maybe a mention on ESPN, and then that team in that league will never talk to me ever again.
Right. Right.
So, not a very good future strategy. So, for the sacrifice of one day early news,
Yeah.
yeah, you guys
I
are going to find out. I would much rather give it to you when it's supposed to come out with a very detailed backstory, sharing every single bit of information you could ever want. And that's my preference personally. But if I know there's no chance I'm going to get that,
yeah.
I might just go ahead and post it.
The Lake County Captains. I mean I have a number of teams and designers, as you know, who will give me advance access, and
Mhm.
we can interview the designer and we can write something up, and so when they do the unveil, we can have a detailed article with actual quotes, not from a press release.
Yeah.
Um, the Lake County Captains did that for me, which was, I really appreciated. I spoke with Alan Miller, who's the new team owner, and they just did, as you know, because it's on your website, they just did a
Yep.
big new update to their brand. And then hours before the unveil was supposed to happen, I started getting texts from friends who were seeing their new logo on the New Era store. Like if you search Lake County Captains, you were seeing the new hats and everything on their store. And so I thought, I've got this article all prepared that they gave me permission to write and, gave me access to all the artwork, and now it's out there. And I very briefly, I was just like, oh, like, what do you do with that? And so I, of course, waited till the embargo was officially over and then we published it. But it was, it is sort of interesting. Like when you get
Mhm.
advanced access to something and then it's out there,
Yeah.
what do you do? I do have a funny story. I don't think I've ever told you this. I'm going to bleep the name. I'm going to tell you the name, and then I'm going to bleep it.
Okay.
Uh, you know the name.
Yes.
He works at a very high level with at least one of the four major sports, who had emailed with me a long time ago. It's not someone who I communicate with regularly, but he emailed me out of the blue and he said, "Hey, Paul, here's those new marks for this four major." It was an event for one of the four major sports leagues, and he says, and he gave me this whole list of opinions on like how he was using the white and how he was doing this and how he was doing that. And I wrote him back, and I was just like, "Hey, I think you emailed this to the wrong Paul." And immediately he wrote back. He's like, "Oh my God." He's like, "This is obviously confidential. I sent it to the wrong Paul." He's like, and to send it to a guy who writes for sportslogos.net, right?
Yeah.
Like I was laughing about it and I wrote him back and I was just like, "Look, don't sweat it. No problem. Don't worry about it. Obviously not going to do anything with this." And then moments later, the phone rings and it's him. And he says, "I really appreciate this." He's like, "This could be really bad for me if that got out there." And so it was just funny that, like, I mean, for him, that was such a big
Yeah.
deal. And for me, it would have been like, what, what do I care about, putting that out there a day before it's supposed to be out there.
Well,
But man, hey, just
now I know that that information is available for I can go talk to him and say like, "Hey, come on."
yeah, this was, I believe, a couple of years ago at this point.
Mhm.
So that event has come and gone, I'm sure. So, but
Well,
it was interesting.
the other Paul is no longer there, so we need to.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, yeah, I never did ask who that other Paul was.
I think we know.
So I am wearing right now the Hanshin Tigers. This is a baseball
Mhm.
cap I picked up in Japan. I'm going to do a complete about face here. We're not talking about covering sports anymore. We're going to talk about something a little bit different. This year has been a really fun year for me. I got to travel to both Great Britain to see the London series where my Phillies played the Mets. And then I got to go to Japan and see baseball in Japan. That was an incredible cultural experience for me. I actually saw the Vancouver Canadians last year as well.
Oh,
So
nice.
I've seen international sporting events on three different continents this past year. I'm curious, what international or otherwise, whether you have iconic sports travel memories, from trips that you've taken, just specific to sports. Like I went to Japan basically just to see two baseball games, built a 10-day vacation around it, but it was basically just for baseball.
So international for me is any trip to the US. I mean,
Of
to be
course.
fair. So I've plenty of trips to spring training,
Oh yeah.
or going like I did a last minute back before I had a wife and children, and my my family had left. So it was just me living by myself just outside of Toronto. This was 2009, I think. And there was a big series going on in baseball. It was last week of the season. It was Tigers versus White Sox. And it was something like they were tied for the wild card or they were tied for the division. I can't remember exactly what it was. And they were playing against each other a series in Detroit. And I woke up that morning and said, "I'm going to Detroit and I'm going to watch that series by myself." I called my boss, told him I was sick, and I just drove down the 401, 4-hour drive to Detroit. I remember at the border, the customs guard, you know, "Where are you staying?" "Oh, I don't have a place to stay. I'm going to find a place." "Where are you going?" "Baseball games, 2 nights." He goes, "When did you make this plan?" I said, "I don't know, 3 hours ago." And the look on his face, he did not believe me. He thought I was
Ah,
insane. He probably thought I was peddling drugs or something across the
right.
border. But they let me through, and I bought a single seat sitting like front row, right behind first base, got to watch both games, and it was probably the happiest I've been in my entire life.
Ah.
Because, but that counts as international
It
baseball.
does. It
Yep.
does.
I crossed the border. I needed a passport, and I did it. But that's probably my favorite international story. A few other trips across to Detroit, again, before I was in a relationship, like Game 7 Stanley Cup,
Ooh.
2009 Red Wings versus Penguins. That was awesome by myself there. Being able to take my dad down to spring training in Dunedin one year, and again, a last second trip, like where I booked the flight like 2 nights before and said, "Okay, we're going. I booked the flights. We have to go." You know, we can't change our minds. And that was nice too, just going to a couple of games down there. So yeah, a lot of my international stories involve the US. I don't think I've seen a sporting event anywhere else other than the US or Canada.
Hmm.
I haven't really traveled. I've been to Scotland, I've been to Italy, and despite the fact that I really wanted to go see a baseball game when we were in Italy,
Yeah.
the other members of my party, who
Ah,
were my wife and two music teachers who we were friends with, were not at all interested in seeing a baseball game in Italy. And
interesting.
I bought a oh, I'm gonna botch the pronunciation, but it's the Florence local soccer team,
Okay.
Fiorentina, I think they are.
Okay.
I went to their stadium and I bought a jersey while I was there. That's the closest I got to an
That's pretty
international.
good. That's
Yeah.
pretty good. The baseball in Japan for me was is that, well, I mean, the London series and baseball in Japan were both great. Years ago, way back in 2010, I went to an Aussie Rules footy match in
Oh,
Melbourne,
nice.
Australia. That was pretty cool.
You got to start
Um,
inviting me on these trips.
Chris, you are very welcome.
I will
I
go.
I did invite you once to Buffalo, New York to see a Bison's game.
Yeah, there was something happening that day. And that counts as
It
international
would have
again.
been international, exactly. That was a
Oh,
cold day. You didn't miss too much. Nice ballpark, but you didn't miss too much.
I've been to a few Bison's games.
Yeah,
I had my son's second birthday party at a Bison's game. We rented a suite and had a bunch of friends come down, and
that's fun.
the
I've
game was
never had
called
an
Deer
international
Fog.
birthday
Yeah,
party that I can
you
think
can
of.
do it. Yeah.
Hey, the getting back to minor league baseball a little bit, there are two things that I think I see as trends here. I'm curious to get your take on from the, I feel like I have a pretty narrow scope of perspective, really focusing on minor league baseball. But, it's been a little while. It's been a couple of years now since the Major League Baseball takeover of minor league baseball.
Hmm.
We've seen independent teams get really wacky, right? Like we've seen independent teams do things like we can be the Danville Dairy Daddies and have this, sexualized Joey Tribbiani cow character as our logo. And then we've seen, I think, affiliated minor league baseball teams do things that are maybe a little more conservative. The Space Cowboys and the Oklahoma City Comets are two examples of those, I think. What do you see in those trends there, affiliated versus independent? Is the Major League Baseball takeover having the effect we thought or feared that it might?
I think it is,
Yeah.
although I don't know if I fear it so much.
Hmm.
To be honest, the more ridiculous minor league baseball brandings that we had seen in the past decade, I was over. It felt like just every team was trying to one up the other team, and it was starting to get silly.
Hmm.
And with Major League Baseball taking over, not that I am loving Major League Baseball taking over, I love that minor league baseball was its own thing. What I do like is that the identities are a little more serious now. They feel a little more major league. Again, not that I like that, but I prefer that over the overly comical or almost like mocking branding that we are now seeing with teams like the Dairy Daddies, which very quick aside story here. I was uh, a newspaper or a radio guy contacted me saying, "Hey, can we talk about the Dairy Daddies and that sexual logo that they got there?" And I was like, "Absolutely not. I don't want to talk about that whatsoever." And I think I forwarded the email to you. I said,
You
"Paul,
did.
yeah, take this, Paul. You
Yeah,
run
and
with
I talked
this."
to that guy for an hour and then ended up not being quoted in the article, and I was
There you
annoyed by
go. Yeah,
that.
maybe he just wanted to talk to you about the Dairy Daddies,
He
and it
could
had
have.
nothing to do
He
with an
could have.
article. I think you were set up. But yeah, I really didn't like how silly it was getting. Like the Rocket City Trash Pandas. I like the branding for it, but I don't like the name. I thought that was a little over the top.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to the captains, you mentioned them in the comments. Those are a little more serious, right?
Hmm.
I like what Lake County did. So I keep saying a little more serious, but minor league baseball should still be a little fun.
Hmm.
Fun without being ridiculous. Does that make sense?
I get it. Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think I mean, like we were talking about the Comets,
Yeah.
they have a more serious, more conservative brand, but they
Mhm.
included in that their little Moon Man guy, right?
Yeah.
Like who is this adorable little astronaut. And, and I think I think that's really fun. And staying with, on the theme of Dan Simon designs here, right? Like, because he did
Yes.
both the Dairy Daddies and the Comets. Like the Rome Emperors to me are like sort of perfect minor league baseball.
That's
It's the logo's kind of serious, but it's still a penguin dressed like an emperor, right? Like so
right. That's
that's
minor league baseball in a logo right there.
right. That is I love that. Chris, I will get you out of here on one last question, which is I this podcast has been going for 3 years. I've been writing for you now for a decade. I think I
Incredible.
missed the 10th anniversary. No. I probably posted about it on social media. The 10th anniversary of my first article on sportslogos.net was this year. You have been maintaining the website sportslogos.net for more than a quarter century now, right? Like
Far too long. Yeah.
it's been
It's
a long
it's
time.
going to be 30 years in a couple of years, which is
It
just
is it is an
insane.
institution. So yeah, so you've been doing this basically 10 times longer than I've been doing the podcast. The website has existed 3 times longer than I've been writing for it. How has this industry of covering sports branding changed since you started it way back when?
It's completely different. When I started doing this it was considered a joke to cover logos, uniforms, a waste of time. When I was researching the book, I'd go back and read articles covering a logo or uniform unveiling, and it was brushed off, right? It was like, oh, the New York Islanders unveiled their new uniforms, but the real story is the ticket prices have increased. Like when the Blue Jays unveiled their logo, it was like a throwaway line at the end of the article. Just like, oh, by the way, they also unveiled their logo with a maple leaf and a bird. Um, it has changed so much in the last 25 years. I don't know if guys like Paul Lucas and myself helped make it more mainstream. I really don't know. I like to think we did, because at first we were kind of blown off by teams and leagues like, get out of here. No one wants to talk about this. To now they're holding huge events where they invite all their fans down and they, like laser light shows and fog machines and everything, and players come out modeling uniforms and fashion shows and stuff. Um, it's pretty wild. One thing I don't like about more mainstream coverage of this is that I now have more competition, which is not fun.
Yeah.
I used to be the only outlet, in addition to Paul, was
Yeah.
also UniWatch was doing it. Um, so a team would come to me and say, "Hey, we need someone to cover this. Will you cover this for us?" And I'd be like, "Absolutely, I'll do it. Don't worry." They spend hours with me talking about it. And now sometimes I don't even know something's coming out, and I read
Right.
about it on ESPN or somebody else has gotten the exclusive. So, I mean, they did not put in the time, Paul. They did not put in all this. They're
You earned
very,
this, Chris.
I earned this. At
I-
least I am the logo godfather here. Someone come to me.
I will never forget, you got me press credentials to the Rockies spring training when they updated their shade of purple. And I sat there and talked to Nolan Arenado for 10 minutes about the shade of purple.
Amazing.
And he was super into it, right? Like, because he's part of this generation where sports
Yeah.
branding is a big deal. And
And back then, nobody else was asking questions like that,
Right.
right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. You mentioned the book, Chris. I want to make sure we mention that. You wrote with our mutual friend, Todd Radom, The Fabric of the Game, the stories behind the NHL's names, logos, and uniforms. I have a copy of it next to me here. Obviously, people can find you at sportslogos.net. That's the website. And you're now on like all the social medias. You're still on X, where you have a large presence, but you're also on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky, where you're increasingly active. So
Blue Sky I like it because it's like Twitter 10 years ago, which is the
Yeah.
Twitter I miss.
I'm enjoying Blue Sky very much. I just had something sort of blow up on Threads a little bit, which is sort of funny because I've been there for a while and things don't really blow up on Threads, but this one did. Chris, I appreciate your time. This is a tradition in the 3 years on this website of me saying this. I've kept you longer than I meant to. I say that to basically every guest. But yeah, no, I really appreciate everything you do. I appreciate having the platform to write about minor league baseball. It's one of my favorite things. I appreciate having gotten to work with you all these years. So thank you very much. And thanks for making time for me today.
Hey, no, hey, Paul, one of my greatest accomplishments is discovering that article that you did 10 years ago and saying, you know what, I'm going to ask this guy to write for us. And he said yes. And it's been a decade of delight ever since.
Well, Chris, thank you. I remember getting the email from you. I was in Costa Rica with my family. It's such a strange memory. I'm like, whoa, look at this. Chris Creamer emailed me. I can't believe it. Chris,
Amazing.
thank you. Hey, we'll see you for the next big Baseball by Design, a ceremonial episode, or next time I cover one of your hometown teams, we'll just get you on to talk about that team.
All right, let's do it.
All right. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Have a good
See you,
one.
Chris. All right, everyone. Welcome back. I am very pleased, as always, more pleased than usual, because this is a very special episode. Dan Simon is here with a Studio Simon Stumper, a third anniversary themed Studio Simon Stumper. Dan, good morning. Hello. Welcome to the third anniversary episode of Baseball by Design.
Well, thank you for having me. And for your listeners, they should know that when we were talking about this prior to the official recording of today's Stumper, your podcast host referred to this as, and not jokingly, as the 300th anniversary. And now, as funny as that is, I would imagine with the amount of work that goes into doing a podcast. And, it's a labor of love, and
Mhm.
I think I can speak for you, and please confirm or deny this assertion of mine that you do love doing it, but it is confirm.
I mostly do it for the money and fame, but yeah, the doing it for the love of minor league baseball is also fun.
Well, speaking of the money and fame, you have, money you don't, as a result of this podcast. And given that, I consider it quite an accomplishment that you are now at 3 years of having done this podcast, because there is a lot of work that goes into it. I don't get to see that work. I know the times I've been on here as a guest and the times I've been on here as the official stumperer, but I don't see what goes into it, but I have an idea of it. And frankly, I don't really know the full extent of it. So for you to have done this for 3 years, I think is a notable accomplishment, and I compliment you on having reached this notable anniversary.
Well, thank you, Dan. That it's honestly like it's so much fun, and this minor league baseball community that we have on social media, and the folks who reach out to me when they listen to the show is it's really gratifying. It's really a lot of fun, and I love this community. I love having these conversations. I love the friendships that have built up around it, including this one right here. It's turned into baseball road trips and me getting to brag that I know the guy who designed that logo every time I see someone wearing one of your logos, which by the way is all the time. Like it's just not even like surprising anymore to see someone go walking by with a Dan Simon creation. So it's I say that it's a labor of love. I love being involved in this I guess industry. I mean, it's an industry for you. It's your livelihood. For me, it's this podcast as a hobby. But it's fun. It's great, and I love this community. And I'm it's always a fun surprise when I realize that every once in a while something will happen that makes me realize that people are out there listening to this, and I find that really gratifying. So hey, come say hello on social media if you listen to this and I don't know you, because it's one of my favorite things.
Yes, I don't get that as much, but I've gotten some of that as well. I've had people reach out to me because of this podcast, and I enjoy that very much as well. But I am just a small cog in the wheel of baseball by design. So let's do our stumper today, or else if we keep going, we might have to do the 400th anniversary stumper at this speed. So anyway, your podcast, of course, is about minor league baseball, and we're talking about 3 years of having done it. So our studio Simon Stumper today asks, which of these three individuals known for their own accomplishments, but outside of baseball, had a minor league baseball career of at least 3 years?
Oh, I love this.
Okay, was it A, George Thorogood? For you younger listeners who may not know, he is a classic rocker known for, amongst a number of other classic rock classics, Bad to the Bone. B, Mario Cuomo, former governor of New York,
Huh.
and father of another former governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo. He's also the father of broadcast journalist Chris Cuomo.
Yeah.
But we're talking about Mario, the father. Or C,
You pronounce Mario like it's a me, Mario.
oh, Mario? Is it Mario?
Mario. Well, Mario is where I would have gone, but hey, you're from New York, and Mario Cuomo is a New York person. So I would defer to your knowledge, your pronunciation on that.
Wow. You know what? I really should know, but I don't. And here's
Okay.
why I should know. My best friend, who was also my best man at my wedding, George Mazzio, who is Italian, and I refer to him being so Italian that he had cousins who had a dog named Mario or Mario. And now that I think about it, I don't know if it's Mario or Mario. I'm going to have to ask George.
By the
And
way, as an aside, we were in Philadelphia for Thanksgiving, and we went to a restaurant. Interestingly, looks like it should be pronounced Mara's, but it's actually pronounced Mara's. And we were we were there, and my 17-year-old daughter Maya was sitting next to me, and she says of our waiter, she says, "That's the most Italian-looking person I have ever seen." And I sort of chuckled, and she says, "And I've been to Italy." That really made me laugh. Sorry. Okay. So George Thorogood, Mario Cuomo, or
C, Macho Man Randy Savage, the professional wrestler. So we've got George Thorogood, Mario Cuomo, or Macho Man Randy Savage. Which one of these had at least a 3-year minor league baseball career?
all right. I will start out by saying I genuinely have no idea.
Okay, I'm surprised you haven't. I'm not surprised like in a disappointed way, but I was afraid when I put this question together that you would know right away having heard this, because I've known about this for years and I don't remember where I first heard it, but I've actually seen things more recently about this man having played minor league baseball.
Okay. Huh. So that means maybe someone who's been in the news recently, or that you would have heard about that. I don't know. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole there. So Macho Man Randy Savage is certainly in the sphere of athleticism in terms of his public persona. But is he? I mean, he would be, if he were a baseball player, he would have been very much in like the Jose Canseco ilk. Mario Cuomo, I see like he would have been kind of like a kind of like a Ruben Amaro, right? Like a contact hitter, sort of scrappy kind of guy. And then George Thorogood, he just seems like he would have been a character from Bull Durham, right? Like just sort of a scruffy scruffy like old-timey ball player guy. I can't think of like a parallel in Major League Baseball. Maybe like a Hunter Pence style. Sort of like this scruffy, like, how is that person actually a ball player? He looks more like a Muppet. So that hasn't helped me any trying to envision them doing this. I'm gonna go with an instinct here, just a pure. My instinct is to go Mario Cuomo.
Final answer?
Final answer, Mario Cuomo.
Well, your instinct is not correct, but it's not far off, because
Okay.
Mario Cuomo, and I just decided it's going to be pronounced Mario. I said Mario, but now I'm going with Mario.
It's a him, Mario.
I'm going to get confirmation on this with my friend George, but I'm going to go with Mario for now. He did play minor league baseball. He was signed by the Pittsburgh Pirates and played one season of minor league baseball in 1952 for the Brunswick Pirates in the Class D Georgia-Florida League. Back then, the classes of baseball weren't single A, double A, triple A. They were A, B, C, D. I don't think it went past D.
Yeah.
So it was a lower level minor league team. He was an outfielder, and in that one season, he batted .244 with 1 home run and 26 RBIs. So he did play minor league baseball, but just that 1 year, and before eventually going on to his political career. The other one who was not a minor league baseball player at all, and by the way, I chose all three of these people because they all have a connection to baseball, but the other one who wasn't a minor league baseball player was George Thorogood.
Oh.
But he is, the reason I included him in this is because I remember when he was at the height of his career, hearing rumors, this is pre-internet days, that he played minor league baseball. Now, I never was able, back then I never looked it up for the purpose of this stumper. I looked it up, and he did not play minor league baseball, but he is a big time baseball fan, and he played 1 year of what is described as semi-pro baseball or is that semi-pro baseball? Again, I'm not sure the pronunciation. I'm going to go with semi-pro baseball. Semi-pro implies you received some money for playing it, but it's
That's
not like in a professional league. But who knows if he received any money for it? He played 1 year, and if the internet is correct, the name of the team on which he played was the same name as his band, the Delaware Destroyers. There were other band members that played on that team. So it was neither Mario Cuomo or George Thorogood. It was Randy Macho Man Savage. Now, his given name is not Randy Savage. It is Randy Poffo. And Randy Poffo was primarily an outfielder who played 2 seasons in the St. Louis Cardinals organization and finished up with the Cincinnati Reds playing in the Florida State League with the Tampa Tarpons.
but not your Tampa Tarpons, different Tampa Tarpons.
Yes, it was the Cincinnati Red affiliate, the first incarnation of the Tampa Tarpons. He was not a bad player in those 3 seasons. He had a career .254 batting average with 16 home runs and 129 RBIs in 289 games. Perhaps more notable than that stat line was that during his minor league career, he was teammates with Ronald Reagan and was managed by Nixon. Now, his Ronald Reagan teammate was not the Ronald Reagan, spelled the same way, but not the same guy.
Oh, Ronald Reagan, the actor?
Boy, there's a line in Back to the Future that references Ronald Reagan.
Yeah. It's when Doc Brown, Marty McFly has shown up and he's shown up in the 50s and he finds Doc Brown and and Doc Brown is saying, okay, if you're from the 80s, then who's the president? And Marty McFly says, Ronald Reagan. And then Doc Brown says, just like I did, the actor?
So, and his manager was not Richard Milhouse Nixon, but rather Russ Nixon, who, if memory serves, was a catcher in the major leagues and later a minor league manager. So, Randy Macho Man Poffo played 3 seasons.
Macho Man Poffo
played 3 seasons of minor league baseball.
Only 16 home runs. I would have thought that he would have been a power hitter. I would have thought that was, he, like I said, a Jose Canseco type.
Right, because he had actually not just a Jose Canseco build, but Jose Canseco and then some. I do not like to speak ill of the dead. Unfortunately, Macho Man Randy Savage has passed away, but I would assume that after his minor league baseball career, he had similar help similar to what Jose Canseco had to have that type of a physique. So
Lenny Dykstra called them special vitamins.
So may he rest in peace, former minor leaguer Randy Poffo.
Well, he would have been my 3rd guess. So this is illuminating as always, Dan, and I appreciate you working so hard as you do on these questions. And I appreciate what an integral part of the podcast you have become. It wouldn't be the same without you. Thanks so much. And here's on to year 4 of Baseball by Design.
Or here's to the next 300 years.
The next 300 years of Baseball by Design coming up.
Okay, I'm looking forward to those.